episode 4 of the Mise-En-Sesh podcast. My name's Elliot, his name's George. Thank you very much. So what we're going to talk about this week? Georgia.
So this week, I assumed you were just doing a sort of test take, so I was doing a clapperboard, but
No.
apparently I just read your intro. So my first topic this week is what successful or unsuccessful spin-offs of successful franchises do you know of? So I'll give examples. At the minute, I am rewatching Torchwood. Loved Doctor Who growing up. I've got my issues with it currently. But Torchwood is one of those shows where I never appreciated it when I was younger because I didn't appreciate the fact it was a much darker take on the whole Doctor Who universe. And the fact that all the characters just tell each other to fuck off every other episode is great. But yeah, so Torchwood, I feel like, is a really successful spin-off, and they had they had 4 seasons in total, 2 of which were just like one continuous story arc, pretty much. But then they had 2 series where it was anthology story arc, so there was one big story contained within the whole series, whereas before it was like, the villain of the week kind of thing. Like there was one challenge you had to face, whereas the final 2 series were big anthology things. And I remember watching them and going, this is really cool. Even though I don't know, like the second series aired 2008, so I would have been, 11 when it aired. So, yeah.
I've never been a big fan of Doctor Who. So I'm sure that brings anger to every part of your soul, me saying that. It's never really clicked with me. Like I did used to watch it occasionally when I was growing up, but it just never hooked me.
No, that's fair. I mean, I definitely held David Tennant on like a pedestal because I grew up. David Tennant was my doctor growing up. Because I had Christopher Eccleston, that was my introduction, and then he was only on it for 1 season. I don't even think they've officially confirmed. I think he said he had an argument with like a high up producer and they essentially forced him off. But so David Tennant was on for like 5 seasons, I think. So he was the one I was watching growing up and getting really excited. And then Matt Smith came along, and obviously, as soon as it's the same with every Doctor Who, you compare them to the previous regeneration. Yeah. So it's like Matt Smith came in with David Tennant being one of the most successful iterations. Matt Smith comes in and I was like, who the hell is this guy? But then going back and having rewatched it with my girlfriend, David Tennant's episodes aren't as interesting. There's a few really good episodes. Like I remember watching the one with the werewolf, like Tooth and Claw. That gave me nightmares for like days. I remember that when I was younger. But then Matt Smith's ones are just more entertaining because they lean much more into sort of the comedy, goofy, childlike element of it. But then you've got Chris Chibnall running it now, and he's essentially just taken all the canon of Doctor Who and thrown it out the window. I have my issues.
Fair.
But yeah.
For me, spin-offs, when you first posed the question, the first thing that came to my mind was, have you seen Breaking Bad?
I've seen bits, but I've never watched it all the way through.
You should definitely watch it all the way through. That's another thing on your to-do list. Place Beyond the Pines, Breaking Bad, all the way through.
I think I know, is it Better Call Saul?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about this.
See, well, the thing is, it's like, Breaking Bad is my favourite TV show of all time. Like, and I think that it is the best TV show of all time, like series of all time. Like I can't see. Obviously, this is like coming from my personal tastes and stuff, but I can't see another show that has been more prolific in just every single episode. There's no bad episodes in Breaking Bad. Like, every single one is like out of the park.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe the Fly one, but I like the Fly one because I'm a pretentious film student. But there's lots of people and lots of memes out there about the Fly episode, but I won't ruin it for you if you haven't seen it.
Is it essentially like you're a fly on the wall kind of perspective?
No, basically there's it's an episode that came around because of they ran out of budget basically in the season, so they needed to shoot one episode that was in one location with only the 2 main characters, Walter and Jesse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they came up with this idea that they were going to be basically in a lab, and they were trying to get a fly out of the lab, and that is the entire episode. So you can see why people might. That's not a very captivating synopsis for the episode, but it's a really good episode, in my opinion.
So,
but
sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that Breaking Bad was such a huge success, and in my opinion, it's one of the best, if not the best, TV show of all time. So when they made Better Call Saul, obviously spinning off, and they're following a character who's in the main series called Saul Goodman. It's his backstory before the events of Breaking Bad. It just it felt, I don't know, to me because I watched the first season of it when it first came out, whenever that was, ages ago now, and I was into it because I was so invested in the world of Breaking Bad. But then I don't know, just something about it. It just sort of became lost on me. It just sort of rolled off me. I don't know if it's because in my head I was sort of comparing it to Breaking Bad without really realizing it, or if it just wasn't as good. But whatever the reason, that spin-off didn't really didn't work for me.
Yeah.
I've since stopped watching it. Although I'd like to watch it.
Sorry, my mum and stepdad were watching Breaking Bad. They essentially, I want to say, binged it. They watched the whole series within a couple of months, like season 1 through 5. And I'm the kind of person where if I'm binging a show, I will sit and watch like 3, 4, 5 episodes back to back to back, kind of thing. Like I'm invested in the story. But my mum doesn't stay up late, kind of thing. Like she won't stay up past like 10 o'clock. She'll just conk out on the sofa. But she will watch like 2 episodes at a time. My stepdad's there like, no, let's watch another. She's like, no, I'm going to bed. And this was the whole thing throughout the whole show. It was 2 episodes at a time. But obviously, when it was left on a big climactic cliffhanger, it was like unbearable to the point like they'd have to watch another one. But what I find hilarious is the fact that they got to like the second last episode. I think they only had the finale to watch, and even I know that the finale is like huge, like the amount of stuff that happens in it. But it took about a week between the second to last episode and then watching the actual finale. So you could see my stepdad, I'm pretty sure he was like biting through his fingernails of just like, I just want to watch it. And I think he ended up just ruining it for himself because he ended up just Googling something. And then he just went through articles, and he then came to me because I said I knew what happened. And he came to me, it was like, oh, I've just seen this, this, and this. I was like, why would you do that? Like, granted, I've done it in terms of like, I've gone through and I've tried to, if I want to see whether a show's worth getting into, I'll look at sort of like, what people think, and occasionally I'll see something like, well, that's ruined the ending of the show for me. By the time I get to it, I've totally forgotten that's going to happen. But it's the fact he Googled it about the episode, the only episode left he needed to watch, and I'm just like, why would you do that?
Yeah. The very last hurdle.
There. Yeah. But yeah, like going on topic of like binging shows. I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but over summer, obviously because of lockdown, we couldn't do a fat lot. So I binged all 15 seasons of Supernatural. I'm pretty sure I might have mentioned
you mentioned
already.
it a couple of times.
But again, like when I was watching them, I think season 15 aired in 2 parts because they were filming it and airing it as lockdown happened. Like they had to cease filming for X amount of months. So it was like it got to about episode. How many episodes are there? I think there were 20 episodes. Got to like episode 10 or 11, and they had to stop airing them because they couldn't shoot anything, and I think they left it about the mid-season point anyway. But it was at that point is when I'd started watching. So then the show picks back up as I'm on about season 8 or something. Like I watch things very quickly because, like I said, I would watch like 5 episodes in one go. But I saw something because it was such a big finale. I was on about season 13 or something when the finale aired, and I was really trying to avoid seeing stuff about it because I was like, I don't want this ruined for me because I've invested so much time.
Yeah.
I was scrolling on something like TikTok, I think, because I'm cool like that. I was just scrolling TikTok, and it was very nonchalantly just sort of, like God talking to an angel or something. And it was, oh, have you done what I asked? And it was like, yeah, so ending is supernatural. And before I could scroll, they started listing off things. And it pops up on screen. And obviously when something pops up, your eye's drawn to it, so you read it. I was like, no, and scrolled, but I saw like two things. And I was like, for God's sakes. And I don't know if you're gonna watch the show at all.
I'll put it on my list.
Okay, essentially, without spoiling it for people who haven't seen it, there are a lot of deaths within the last few episodes. Like a lot of characters essentially either killed off or they are moved on from whatever. Things happen, characters no longer in the story. And it was one big one. And I was like, you are fucking with me. I've got about a season and a half left until I'm at that point. For God's sakes. But yeah, like I say, by the time I then got to it, I'd actually forgotten it was going to happen because I was so invested in the story. But yeah, so the point I'm trying to make with that is they attempted two spin-off shows from that. One in like season six, 5 or 6, which is meant to be called like Supernatural Bloodlines, and they essentially had a backdoor pilot where it's like you meet this guy who his dad is like he was killed in the police force or whatever, and then he's thrown into the world of Supernatural because his girlfriend gets killed by something, and the whole episode he's trying to figure it out. And at the end of the episode, he gets a phone call, and what? It's his father who's calling him, and he's like, "Don't go into this world. Whatever you do, don't try and find me." And it was meant to be a backdoor pilot into the spin-off show, but before it even got, essentially, it got cancelled before they started filming because the producers just didn't think it would be successful. And then around season 12 or 13, they tried another one called Wayward Sisters, which was an all-female led cast. And again, it got scrapped before it even made it through production. And it's just one of those things where even if you've got such a successful show, such as Supernatural, it went for 15 seasons, and they cancelled on their own terms. They weren't cancelled. They said this is the final season. Even at that point, it's still not a 100% a successful thing to the point it's if you sign on, you're going to get the show. Yeah. And I think that's quite interesting because, say, something like Torchwood, I don't think it would have been as successful. Looking at it, I'm like, it clearly wasn't as popular as Doctor Who, but it has quite a big fan base even now. And the fact is, some of the stories still hold up; they're still really, really good. But then, if you compare something like that, where it's a spin-off of Doctor Who or Supernatural, to then we've got WandaVision, which is the big thing at the minute. And we've literally just talked about the fact you haven't seen the latest episode, so we won't talk about it.
Yeah, I've seen up to episode 4.
Yeah, what we can mention, though, is the fact that I don't know if it's confirmed, but from what I've heard, it is the most expensive TV show there is, with each episode costing roughly around 25 million.
Really?
And you can probably slash off about 10 million of that for like fees and
like salaries.
Salaries, that's the word. But yeah, it's I think 9 episodes, and the total for the show is about 225 million.
Oh my God.
Which is, when you think about the fact it is part of the MCU, and the average MCU film probably costs about that, and you're getting 9, give or take 30-minute episodes. It's like, it works out pretty well.
Yeah, well, I imagine that, like obviously I've only seen episodes 1 through 4, but given the trend shown in that first 4 episodes, I'd imagine that the budget for the episodes will sort of skyrocket in the second half of the season, because from the first 3 episodes at least, you definitely wouldn't think that the budget is that much. Obviously, it's well produced and it's well put together. It's a high production value, but you wouldn't have guessed it was like upwards of tens of millions to film those episodes. But I'm guessing that a lot of that money is wrapped up in salaries, because you do have actors that are working on these short TV episodes who were in the MCU films. So I'm guessing their salaries are quite a lot
Well,
higher.
it's probably working out quite well for Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany
Yeah,
because I don't know how much they were getting paid for each appearance, but I know before Age of Ultron, Paul Bettany was essentially just handed a couple of million and then just stood in a recording booth for a
yeah,
couple of days. Like that was it. Because obviously he was Jarvis, so he was only he was a voice
yeah,
in Tony Stark's ear. That was pretty much it.
yeah. He's dead pleased.
Then it, well, then I think he did a story on like Graham Norton or something where they what was it? Essentially, what was the Iron Man 3 or something? Whatever the last one you see Jarvis in. Paul Bettany was under the impression that was going to be his final film. Um, so he was with his what is it? What's the talent manager or whatever it is, the person who gets them their gigs, the agent. That's all. And he was with them, and they essentially said like, "You're done in Hollywood. That's it. Your career's finished. You've dried up. Like, there's no work coming in." And essentially, it was just complete shit to him. And he's sitting there. He walks outside. He's sitting on the pavement outside because he's just sort of his life is now like he's just there, sort of like life in his hands. Like, what the fuck do I do? And he gets a call from Kevin Feige, who says, "Hey, yeah, we just thought you don't have to do it. Obviously, if you've got other stuff going on, but would you like to play Vision?" Like, we've got this story. He explained it over the phone very briefly in terms of like Jarvis becomes Vision because of XYZ, and essentially then Vision will become a more sort of major character as time went on. And then Paul Bettany just sits on the street and goes, "Yeah, no, I'd love to do it. Yeah, I'd love to." And he just turns around and starts flipping off his agent. And I just think it's the fact he's gone from something just, he's Jarvis, he's a background character, no one really acknowledged him much. He had a few sassy lines. So then you've got him as one of the titular characters in this multi-million per episode show. I think that's one hell of a climb.
Yeah,
That's pretty good.
it just goes to show how like the voice of Jarvis became so like distinct and so enjoyed by people that they ended up writing it into becoming Vision. Like that shows
Yeah.
how good of a vocal performer that he was when he was doing the voice of Jarvis.
But one thing I hadn't appreciated is because obviously Vision is in, like when he's in his suit, he looks very sort of sharp around where like sort of his abs are and all that. And it's clearly just sort of the way his costume
Yeah,
is. He's meant to look not quite human kind of thing. So it's sort of he's got sharp edges where no one has sharp edges, like on his abs and stuff. But then there's a couple of sequences in WandaVision where he's in human form and he's got quite a tight top on. I'm just looking like, how the fuck is Paul Bettany in that good a shape? Like, he looks ripped. And I don't know, it could be just a muscle suit underneath. Like, he could be just really scrawny in
I'd
reality. I
imagine he
don't
probably
know,
keeps himself in very good shape.
but he looks pretty beefed up. He looks quite good. Um, but yeah, I am absolutely loving the show, and it's really irritating me that I have to wait a week in between each episode because they Marvel know how to leave you on a cliffhanger. Definitely,
Oh yeah,
I feel Infinity War was I think that was one of the hardest years for MCU fans because you had to wait a whole year to find out what the hell happened, and then like when you compare it in comparison of like you've got to wait a week to find out what happened, but still it's like I then know I've got to wait a week after that to find out what happens after. Yeah, it's a rinse and repeat process.
I mean, WandaVision's a good example of a spin-off done. I say a spin-off done well, but it sort of stands on its own because it is so like. Obviously, I watched it with my girlfriend, and she hadn't seen the MCU past. And she hadn't seen the MCU past Guardians of the Galaxy 1 at that point. So we started watching it, and the way it's constructed as a show is that it could stand on its own, because it's so sort of like everything about the show like sort of alludes to something else happening. Like nothing's ever quite as it seemed. So it was interesting watching her watch it because she was just confused. She was sort of like, "Wait, what?" And you can see it was like sort of like gripping her in because she wanted to know what was going on. But obviously, as someone who's seen more of the MCU than her, and obviously you've seen all of it, so you know, like it's sort of satisfying to watch because you know what's like, there's something bigger at play, and it's interesting watching someone who hasn't seen the background stuff who just gets hooked because it's mysterious.
But what? Yeah, I'm quite, because for those who haven't seen the show, essentially each episode is inspired by a different decade of TV. So I think it starts in the 50s, then it goes to the 60s. I can't remember what shows, but it's like the 60s inspired by Bewitched. Then goes 70s episode 3, 80s is episode 4, kind of. Oh no, I don't know. I think 80s is episode 5 because episode
Episode 4 is
4
largely outside of
they take a step away
yeah.
from what's happening. So then episode 5 is the opening, especially inspired by Full House.
Okay.
And I think that was the 80s.
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure Elizabeth Olsen is in. Or is it? No, it's her sisters, Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. So that's a fun little thing. But the way they're doing it, the way they advertised it, I was like, okay, so it's going to be, they're going to do this, and each episode they're going to have to solve an issue, like based on whatever time period they're in. But then episode 4, where you step outside of Westview, I was just watching. They're like, oh my god, like that's the fact it just suddenly snaps back into what is the MCU is just insane. It's like the amount of detail that's gone into it. Yeah, safe to say, I really like the show.
Well, I promise next time we're on the podcast, I will have watched episode 5, but I'm waiting.
It'll be episode 6 by the time we next record.
I can't promise I'll have watched episode 6. But I've definitely watched episode 5. In fact, I might just watch it and then just rewatch it with Holly because I want to know what's going on as well.
See, what was horrible for me is episode 5 aired. So today Saturday?
Sunday.
No, today's Sunday. So I've lost track of days.
Super Bowl
so
Sunday.
Fridays is when it. Well, I don't follow the NFL. So the episodes air on Fridays, but it's 8 a.m. our time is when they release. And normally the episodes are about 25-30 minutes with about 6 minutes of credits. Like the credits are really so long, it's ridiculous. It's mad. But I heard from my friend that there was well, no, that was it. Elizabeth Olsen had confirmed there was essentially. You've seen the end of Mandalorian?
Yes.
Yes, the whole Luke Skywalker thing. Yeah. So there was a whole thing about Elizabeth Olsen saying there was a big reveal, like a big cameo, which was on this level of Luke Skywalker in Mandalorian. So I remember watching that, and I was like, because I was at work all day, so I had to essentially watch it in like 10-minute segments when and where I could, because I didn't then want to just be scrolling social media at one point and just see something and have it ruined for me. So then I watched it the other day, and I could take it in, and then I saw the cameo. I was like, that's pretty good. Obviously, I won't say anything for you, but then I watched it again with my girlfriend, and I could really appreciate it more because I could just sit down and watch it without having to stress out about something being ruined for me. So that's the constant fear I'm living in at the minute. But yeah.
You're going to have to get up extra early and watch it before work. I know you start.
I can't. That's what I tried. I start around 8 o'clock. Yeah. Well, I think I started at 8:30. So I was like, right, I can just sit at 8 o'clock, immediately start playing it, and then just waltz into work as I'm watching it. But then they released a 40-minute episode, and I was like, you're taking the piss, right? The one time I can watch it, yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. Getting back to sequels, though, I think it's always a dangerous game. Not sequels, spin-offs. It's always a dangerous game when you have something that's successful, like a film or if it's a TV show, whatever it is. It's always a dangerous game when you try and turn that into something else. Like obviously it's motivated by money because it's something's popular, an IP's popular, so they want to keep cashing in on that. It's like when Friends first finished, and there was that. I think it was one season of Joey's. I can't remember what it was called now, but that time
I think it was just called Joey.
Yeah, they gave Joey his own show because he was a beloved character, and they thought they could squeeze some more cash money out of that character. But it's the kind of thing like trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice.
They had 2 seasons, 46 episodes, 8 were unaired.
So
there you go.
When you compare that to the success that Friends had, that's quite abysmal, really.
Yeah. It is literally one of those things. If you take a very popular character, you try putting them on their own, necessarily because they don't have that whole dynamic that all the other characters had.
Yeah.
You've essentially taken one stick of that show and tried to make it work on its own. It's not going to work.
Yeah. And it just we was talking about Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul earlier. Better Call Saul, I think it's successful in its own right because obviously it's liked, but it's different from Breaking Bad, which is something that held me back from enjoying it because I went into it expecting to be like Breaking Bad 2.0, but minus 1.0 because it's before, but whatever. But a good example of a film of a sequel or a spin-off rather, I don't know which this one counts as, that really failed to capture the magic of the original was when they released El Camino, which is the Netflix film, which directly precedes Breaking Bad.
No, it takes place immediately after the episode finishes, doesn't it?
Yes, El Camino follows Jesse's story because Breaking Bad is a series. Like the second to last thing you see is Jesse driving off into the distance, and then obviously the ending happens. So El Camino takes place directly from Jesse driving off, and you follow his story and you see what happens to that character because the original show leaves it quite ambiguous. But it's just, I don't know. Obviously, you've not watched Breaking Bad all the way through. I'm guessing you haven't seen El Camino in that case.
No, I haven't.
It's weird because El Camino it sort of felt to me like it was like a fan fiction film. It was like a fan film that someone had made, like.
Yeah, because literally just from the way you've described it, it's like they left it ambiguous, but he didn't need an ending. It's like realistically, what was he going to go on and do?
Yes,
like he's either going to go off and end in like a gang war or whatever. He's going to start a life. It's not like he's going to become a superhero and do X, Y, Z. It's like you don't need. You can leave things ambiguous because then it leaves it open to the audience interpretation. Whereas, yeah, like you say, if it is just sort of tacked on at the end, like 5 to 10 years later, it was almost like 10 years later.
Yeah, I think it was 20. Oh, I want to guess 2017 at first. The El Camino came out. I'm going to check it now. It's going to bug me if I don't.
2019.
That was 2019. God.
Yeah. When did Breaking Bad end?
Breaking Bad ended in. It was 5 seasons. 2013, I think. It started in 2008, and it was 5 seasons long. So I'm guessing 2013.
Yeah.
But it's like the character of Jesse, he got what he wanted in the original ending to the original show. Like the character towards the end, he sort of desired, to be out of the game, to be free of it, and that's what he gets at the end of the show. I don't think that's a spoiler. That's just that's just what he gets as a character. So the whole El Camino thing, it sort of makes a story out of nothing. And I think you can sort of tell that's happened as well. It's called El Camino, it's called that because that's the name of the car that he's driving. No, sorry, it's not the car that he's driving. Wait, hang on. No, it is. It's the name of the car that he's driving when he gets free.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like this. I don't know. Had they done it sooner, had they done it closer to the end of the original show, I think it would have been much better because it's all still fresh and the creative juices are still there. And the actors, God, one of the things that drive me crazy is one of the actors is significantly larger than he was in the original show, but the actor didn't lose the weight to play that character again. So now you
Yeah.
just suddenly got this fat version of a character. It just completely
It.
breaks the illusion of it being
Yeah.
reset. But I think if they'd done it sooner, and obviously you can tell the characters have aged and stuff, and they've changed because it's like recorded like 6 years after the original show ended.
Yeah.
Had they done it sooner, it would have been a more sort of fulfilling thing to watch. Even if the story was the same, all the characters would look the same, and they'd still be sort of connected to those characters. Because I think as an actor, you sort of become like engulfed by a character that you've been playing for so long. I think it's quite difficult to go back into a character after all those years. But like I said earlier, like I think El Camino was just, they had this open-ended thing about this character that everyone loved, and they just thought, time for a payday, and they put that film into production. And that on that occasion, I think it didn't backfire, but it definitely didn't pay off like they hoped it would.
It kind of, the way I'm looking at the situation, it feels almost like a script writer or something, or a screenwriter, has binged Breaking Bad, looked at, so like years later, looked at the ending and gone, oh, maybe I could come up with an idea of what happens to Jesse, and then pitched it to whoever, like the producers, and gone, right, look, because everyone loves this show, this is what can happen. And it, like, the fact, yeah, like you say, they didn't make actors. I appreciate, obviously it's a bit tricky to say you need to lose the weight to play the character again, but also it's like, to serve, to do a proper fan service, you need to have
Yeah,
continuity. Because if it's set years in the future, then sure, they could have put on weight. But if it's set 2 days after the ending of that thing, it's like, realistically, you're not going to have put on like 100 pounds in
well,
that time, are
this
you?
is the
Like,
worst part about it, because the character in question that's significantly fatter, he appears in flashbacks that take place during the main show. So So me having someone who's very invested in that show, I know what that character looks like during the time period that these flashbacks are taking place, and then
mm,
he's just like fat as hell, and it's just there's no explanation. Like if they had some kind of, if they acknowledged it, that would be one thing, but they didn't. They just sort of
yeah.
like, this character's fat now, deal with it. So I remember watching, I was just like, is it like a fat suit, or is it like, is there a reason for this, or is it just, I was waiting for it to be explained. It just never was. I was like, okay, I guess it was
Yeah.
just
It's one,
the actor didn't want to lose the weight, so they just roll with it
they'll just
anyway.
sort of hope you
Yeah,
accept it. Yeah. Oh, fair enough. I don't know. I do feel like there is, when it comes to production of stuff, there is a lot of stuff is turned away because it doesn't work. But then, depending on who you go to, as long as it's, oh look, this is part of the Breaking Bad franchise, or this is part of, I don't know, like the MCU, they'll be like, yeah, sure, cool, green light
yeah,
it, fine, you write it, we'll make sure it fits these criterias. They don't check it's a comprehensive story. They don't get continuity people in, like that. Like, one thing, working on the project I'm working on now, I didn't appreciate how big of a role continuity have, because like, they essentially they have more say than the camera operators do, because it's like, even the director has to listen to continuity, because obviously, if in a wide take the character's done this, but then in the close-ups they've done that, if continuity don't spot it, they could lose their job, and it's on them to make sure things fit. So it's, as again, going back to it, you can't necessarily turn to an actor and say you have to lose this weight to play this person, but there should have been a thing saying, for fan service, to make sure the story flows almost seamlessly. It's sort of like, you, to serve the character, you do need to lose a bit of weight. But then again, there could be a reason why they couldn't lose
yeah.
it. And if anything, would you not be more pissed off if they totally recast the role?
No, I think in the case of El Camino, uh, again, I don't know the actor personally. Shock. But I don't know if there was something else that made him so he couldn't lose the weight. I don't know if he has like a condition, or if he just didn't want to, or if he was gaining weight for another role that he was doing. I don't know.
The Henry Cavill mustache.
There's a lot of different factors that go into someone being the way they are. Like, he's an actor, so I'm guessing he keeps himself in as good a shape as he needs to. So maybe he had a different film that he was getting ready to shoot and he had to gain the weight. Whatever, I don't know. But I think it's not necessarily the actor's fault in that case, because I think if you're the producer or you're the director or something, or you're the script writer, and you've reached out, obviously they have to reach out to all these characters, all these actors, and to see if they're up for doing the project before you even start writing it, because there's no point in writing it unless you can get the characters back on board, because like you said, you're not going to recast everything. But I think the producers or the director or the writer, whatever, they should have seen, okay, this actor he just doesn't look like the original character does. So yeah, the sequences that he appears in, which do in turn break the immersion of the film, they could have just written a different story that didn't require that character, because that character, like in the timeline when the film actually takes place, that character's gone. He's not there anymore.
Okay.
So the character only appears in flashbacks. And in my opinion, they could have made a much more captivating film had they not had the flashbacks, and had they let the character of Jesse really take full center stage in the film.
Yeah.
What the film feels like to me is, it's like, it's just Jesse is a vessel for Breaking Bad callbacks.
Yeah.
Like, the character of Jesse feels very sort of like empty, because I could go about this forever, because the character of Jesse, he gets what he wants at the end of the series, and the way he is at the end of the series, like, what we know as Jesse is sort of gone because of things that he's been through. So by the time El Camino happens, like, the character, like I said, is a bit of an empty shell of Jesse, but that's what Jesse is at that point. So the character is sort of empty and broken, and then so there's nothing really, like, I'm not watching it and be like, oh no, Jesse. I'm just like, oh, okay, when's the next cameo going to be? When's the next reference going to be? When's the next callback going to be? I'll stop ranting about Al Camino now. But it just felt to me like, I said I'll stop. No, I'm still going. It felt to me like, did you ever play like Fallout as a kid, the game? Like, I remember watching it ages ago. It must have been like 2014, 15ish. Someone made a fan film that was set in the Fallout New Vegas world, and they had like it was a NCR Ranger and all the armor and stuff. It was all just like, cool. It's cool to see as like a film rather than a game.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much substance to the story. It was just a character dressed as something you're familiar with, going places and doing things, and there was references sprinkled in it. And that's fine for a game. But El Camino felt like that for Breaking Bad, which just doesn't do it justice.
Yeah. Well, there's a show called Chuck. Don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's Zachary Levi, Yvonne Strahovski, Alex Baldwin. Essentially, it's a computer nerd who went to Stanford but was kicked out, who then essentially becomes like a super spy. And they had 5 seasons, and it's one of my favourite TV shows of all time, just because it's funny, it's action, and the stories are actually quite interesting. But so Zachary Levi, who's now gone on to play like Shazam and like loads of other stuff, he has always said he'd do a film. He'd be up to do a big farewell send off in the form of a film.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the other cast said it as well. But I feel like the show aired in 2012. Going on 9 years later now, it's like that. Just put it away. You shouldn't readdress that anymore, because unless you're going to set it 9 years in the future, it's like by that point, so much stuff is going to have happened to these characters with the lives they lead and stuff like that. it's like I don't think it would do any service. So I'm glad they haven't done it. As much as inside, I'm like, I wish they'd do it because I want to see more with the characters. I'm glad they haven't done it because sort of like the way you see El Camino, I don't feel like it would give enough service to the characters. I feel like it
Yeah,
would be something just tacked on right at the end, just as a quick cash grab.
yeah.
But yeah, moving on to the next topic because I feel like we've been on this for ages now. So there was a thing I saw where it was like 20 years or like 40 years ago, filmmaking, you were on location. You'd go wherever the set was, kind of thing. You couldn't just people didn't have the money to build everything.
Yeah.
So they'd go to a location, they'd put up like a quick structure. Like with The Shining, the hotel, can't remember what it's called. The Overlook Hotel. The the shots you get, they just built the front of the hotel. That's all just been built. So it's like they'd go to that location. Then in like I don't know when it became a big thing, but then being on green screens and blue screens, that suddenly became the norm. It's like you
That
didn't
was
have to
like
go anywhere.
very early 2000s-ish. Like,
Yeah. So it's like you could suddenly just be wherever you wanted to be within the comfort of a soundstage, as long as you had the good lighting and the good,
yeah,
like VFX in the end of it, like CG, you'd be fine. Then in very current years, like very recent years, you've moved on to things like volumes or LCD screens. My question is, what do you think the next evolution could be? Like, where do you think filmmaking will go next?
well, it's hard sort of to guess because to myself and I'm guessing to the vast majority of people, the whole technology of using screens instead of actual LCD screens instead of blue screens and green screens, that will still feel like space age, cutting edge filmmaking. So that sort of still feels like the future to me.
Hmm.
But I don't know, it's hard to see where it could go next. Sort of because I don't know. It's like the where it goes next is to me that's still the LCD screens and like they've done
Hmm.
Mandalorian. That's to me that is still like in the future. So like trying to see what's coming after that is like double future. Um, but I guess that at some point like I don't know like augmentation and augmented reality that's probably going to become more of a thing. At something once they find a way to implement that into a usable filmmaking space, that's probably going to be something that appears in the
Yeah.
future. But again, it's hard for me to say what's going to be, in the future when the future is already like just started, like the era of using the screens and the tracking
Hmm.
software and like NCAM like you're using. That's still, to me, that's still like the new stuff. Yeah, like the
Like cutting
future
edge
of
kind of stuff.
filmmaking has only just like begun for me in my head. So I don't know what's going to come after that. That's too far ahead for my puny brain.
No, fair enough. Because a lot of things I've seen, it's like they feel like we're going to go back to
Yeah, that was
locations.
yeah,
It's like you're going to shoot on locations again, and I feel like there is some substance to that because it's like you have to be on location. So the project I'm working on at the minute, I'm only working on the blue screen elements, so all my time I'm in a blue screen stage. But they're also going to locations later in the year because, like, realistically, you can't just do everything on a blue screen. But I feel like I don't know how realistic this is, but in my head it'll be something like a volume, so just the big LCD screens everywhere. But it'll be something where the camera can move through the space and it'll just be a big 360 thing, like a huge thing. And it's like the sets can just not appear, but it's like you've got structures or something which can all adapt as and when you need them, kind of thing. I don't know. I feel like it will just be an adaptable set, kind
well,
of like whatever you
yeah,
need,
I
it
feel
can do.
like yeah, that sort of plays into the idea of augmentation because if I think about it now, like now I've had a second to think about it while you've been talking, it's like I feel like like it's hard. It's hard to see like why they'd improve, because like modern day CG stuff is so good anyway. But it's like you could picture, for example, like you said, the it might be a case of we move backwards a little bit, but I don't think
Yeah.
it necessarily be backwards. It would be a combination of old and new. I think would be the next
Mm.
logical step. Like I feel like miniatures will probably make a comeback, maybe, because I can imagine
Yeah.
the pros of using miniatures inside what's it called? You call it the volume. You feel like a
Yeah.
smaller scale volume, which could be something that's more easily obtained by lower budget things. Like a combination of miniatures with the volume thing around the edge of them for like big shots, big sweeping shots, and then use tracking to then insert actors into that. That could be something that could up production quality of lower budget things, because it's a smaller volume, but then you still have the miniatures, which makes it look realistic to close ups, and then the stuff that's far away, like the skybox, essentially is the volume, so it's all like photo real. That's somewhere it could go.
Yeah.
But again, with augmentation, is you could have, obviously you've got these robotic camera arms and stuff now. Um, I don't know how the technology that they use to create the volume. I don't know how that scales up, because I know like in the Mandalorian, it's like however many feet high and this many feet wide, and it's got a curve to it. Obviously, I don't know how that scales up. I don't know what the limitations are with that. I imagine it's probably bound by computer power, but
Mm.
if that scales up, you can sort of build these like they do with Mandalorian. They have the real elements in front, and then they use the volume for the background. But as that technology can scale
Yeah.
up, you could end up having this thing where you could build like an artificial street on a stage somewhere, and instead of having green screen around the edge of it to insert, like for example, let's say you want to do like an old time London thing. You want to make it like it's 1850 in London, and you can't have transport for London buses going across. So you build yourself a set, like a real set, like a street, and instead of having green
Yeah.
screen, you have the volume surrounding that, so the actors can be immersed in the environment that they're in. That could be something that I could see
Yeah.
happening once the technology can scale up.
That's kind of what I was trying to get at. You've explained it so much better than what I meant. So yeah, like having the volume, but like say like 5 times the scale. So it is something where it's not just like you can have, certain like physical props which then flow into the LCD screens. So like with Mandalorian they have like very specific segments of like the Razor Crest ship. So it's like the back of it where Mandalorian walks down the ramp. That would be real, but then it cuts off about I don't know like a foot ahead of the ramp, and then the rest of it's all on the screens. But then yeah, being able to have essentially a whole soundstage being being comprised of the volume, like the LCD screens, would I feel that would remove the need for things like blue screens to some degree. Obviously, there are some things where oh, my chair just went down. There are some things where like a blue screen is obviously significantly
Yeah,
cheaper to work than a volume. But then again, so I don't know realistically what I'm allowed to say about this, but there is a project where they're working with very similar technology, a couple of sound stages over, a couple of sound stages over from where I'm working, and then literally like down on the back lot of where I'm working, they've also built a physical set, which is like a whole village kind of thing. So there's obviously there are limitations to what the volume can do because you can't have big sweeping shots and like long tracking shots on a volume because you're essentially limited to that. You can't have long one shots because you're limited to about I don't know, a 20 by 20 foot space with about five interactable props, and the rest of it's all projected onto a screen. So yeah, I do feel like that's where the next evolution will be. It will be the technology we've got just on a
Yeah,
much bigger
yeah,
scale. And I'm excited to see where it goes, but I don't think that will be a thing for another 5, 10 years
yeah.
at
Like
least.
again, it's filmmaking as a business, so it's about doing. It's not just about doing things that like the best way or the most cutting edge way. It's also about doing it the most profitable way. So I think it'll be a
Oh
while
yeah.
before the technology of the volume sort of lowers in price, so that these lower budget shows can get access to it at all. But I think it'll be even longer before. It'll take, I don't know, probably like Avatar 3 or something stupid, where they'll have like the volume be everywhere, and like that. I think that'd be the next giant leap. It won't necessarily be a new technology. I think it'll be a new implementation of technology that we already have, and maybe a new
Yeah.
combination as well. Because if you picture like a giant sound stage, like a big one, for example, you could have a volume on all four walls, like the Truman Show. Like you just like walk in to the
Mm.
set, and you combine that with real things, real built things inside that. Then if you can scale it up that big, then you could have big long shots using the volume, but that's dependent on if you
Mm.
can scale up the technology. And given how cutting edge the volume is at its current scale, I'd imagine it would be, again, computers like the double in speed like every 6 months or something stupid. So I
Yeah,
don't
it's
think
not
it's necessarily
ridiculous.
limited by how big they can make the volume screen, because it's just screen. It's just having the computer power to drive that, and do it economically as well. But I feel like that would be the next big leap,
Mm.
is when we get these huge sound stages which are just volume on all walls, and like they just build what they need inside that. I think that'll probably be the next big leap.
Yeah, because then you could have things like like Godzilla vs Kong,
Yeah,
or whatever it is, like whatever the new film coming out is. You could have something like that where it's I obviously I haven't seen it, so I have no idea. But I don't know if they've used anything like miniatures. But that being able to film something like that on a volume where it's you don't need to like you could have miniatures. So obviously, a guy in a big Godzilla suit, which would allow for more accurate lighting and stuff like that. Like you wouldn't need to worry as much about CG rendering. But that could be so much cooler because then you could have really interesting camera angles, which maybe wouldn't work as well if they were done in a full CG
yeah.
environment. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, like you say, at the minute we're already at cutting edge with like the volume and LCD screens and all that. So again, like you say, like it is sort of looking
Yeah.
past what is already the future. Like we're trying to look so far ahead to the point where we're
Have you
trying,
seen
yeah.
Band of Brothers?
But yeah, maybe I think so. Long time ago though.
Well, in oh god, let's see if I can get it right. Episode, I want to say 6. I'm going to check it. I want to say episode 6. There's the Battle of the Bulge, I think. Um, let me just check so I get it right, because it's going to bug me if I got it wrong. Ho! Episode 6. Bastogne, not Battle of the Bulge. Or is that? I don't know. I forget names of World War II battles. But they're filming in
Yeah.
the characters are in Bastogne, and it's during the winter, and they're all dug in the trenches, and it's like a sort of a long sort of stalemate between the Americans who are in the woods and the Germans who are in the town, which the Americans want. And I think the episode takes
Hmm.
place over a series of weeks that they're trapped. Obviously, it's all based on real events. They were trapped on that front line
Yeah.
for however many months. And when they filmed that, they the vast majority of like the trenches and like the stuff that happens within the woods, that's all done on a soundstage where they built a forest inside a soundstage. So they had the artificial snow
Yeah.
inside, and they had it all. Obviously, they couldn't just film it at night without massive difficulty. So they had the forest, all the snow, all the blown up trees, trenches, people, extras, and stuff. All that was on a soundstage, and because it was set at night, it didn't really matter about the edges, because they just lit up the bit they wanted to see, and then the rest of it just goes into darkness because
Hmm.
it makes sense. But if you think
Yeah.
about that kind of thing, where they built a forest inside a soundstage because it made sense to do that rather than trying just to shoot it all at night. If you combine that with a volume around the edges, picture, say if you're making a fantasy film, let's say if you're remaking Lord of the Rings, for example, like you could
Yeah.
build just the sort of what you needed to be like, what you need the characters to interact with, but take you've seen Lord of the Rings, haven't you? Like you're familiar with it, like the Rivendell,
Yeah.
for example, the big elven
Mm-hmm.
safe house, which is obviously elven architecture, and it's all like on the side of mountains, and it's all golden, and it's all like impossibly beautiful and pristine. Like if you was to reshoot Lord of the Rings with that kind of technology, where you have the volume on all four walls, you can have these characters walking through these areas, and you can have the environment of Rivendell or Menace or anywhere that's in Lord of the Rings, because there's so many out of this world, cities and places in there.
Mm.
You could have that projected onto the screen in so much more detail than they could do it back then, because back then they did it with miniatures, which they then green screened onto like a real set, much the same as what you would do with the volume actually, but the volume allows you to do it with much more detail and flexibility. It wouldn't necessarily allow you to
Yeah.
do anything new, but it would allow you to do it to a much higher level if you could have the volume scaled up, which is good for us as viewers because we just
Yeah.
get more and more production quality. Like it seems like every year, like production quality in like TV shows, the standard seems to like double. Like everything looks like a movie now.
Yeah. Like one thing that does confuse me when it comes to sort of groundbreaking technology is that Black Magic, which is a camera company, released a
Yeah,
12K camera. I don't know if we've discussed this already, but I can understand why 8K is a thing because it means you can reframe, you can crop, you can do a lot post filming. So you can just film like don't know what I'm trying to say here, like a wide angle shot, like a master shot, and then you can essentially crop into like more close up
yeah,
shots. So you can get more detail and stuff like that. And you can do that without losing quality because no one at home, and even in cinemas, I don't think they're doing it. Like, nowhere is showing things in full 8K resolution. So there's no real requirement for it past being able to have more control in post production. So then to have a 12K camera where I think it's double the resolution of 8K, just the way it works out. It's like at that point, you're literally just paying for pixels. Like there's no benefit to having 12K other than if you're doing a major wide shot and you want a proper close up of someone, which you just can't be bothered to film on the
but
day.
again,
Like,
it's
yeah,
I don't necessarily think the 12K camera exists so people can just reframe and do stuff like that. I think the reason that exists is because it's sort of again it's the bleeding edge of camera tech that they'll then be using for VFX and stuff like that. Because if you think like the camera that I'm on now is 80D. This came out in like 2013, 14, I don't know. But it's quite an old camera. But when it shoots a still image, it shoots it in. I don't think it's quite 8K, but it's not far off 8K when it shoots a still raw image. Um,
mm.
and you think about the amount of detail that you get in that compared to like the 1080p video. It's crazy. But the 12K thing that allows you to sort of scale up your tracking points and everything to much higher resolution effects. I think that's probably the benefit of having a 12K camera. Again, I don't think it does anything that an 8K camera can't, but it will just do it to a different level, if that makes sense. Like if you think, if it's twice the resolution of
I
8K, it's twice the information for camera for software to work with. So I don't know if it allows you to do anything necessarily different, but I feel like in a few years, 12K cameras might become more of a thing, and I feel like that it will just be another sort of again, it's another refinement in the process of what VFX we already see all the time anyway. But with it being 12K, it's twice. If it's twice the resolution, it's twice the information, which means it's half as much, in theory, half as much calculation and guesswork that the software has to do the VFX stuff. I feel like that might be where they're going with 12K cameras, but I feel like, again, it's probably just a flex from Blackmagic saying they can do a 12K camera.
Yeah. I was gonna say I see where you're going with that, and it does make some sense in terms of like, yeah, it'd be beneficial to have more pixel density, but it's the fact that like you've barely got 8K screens are coming out. I don't know what the cost of an 8K screen is
I don't
currently,
know if there is any.
but obviously for your public consumer market, no one's going to have them. Being able to edit at 12K, like I can't remember what the file
Huge.
sizes are.
But again, I don't think necessarily 12K is meant as a thing for you to, like on YouTube, for example, you have these YouTubers who shoot in 4K to then output to 1080p because it makes it sharper, and then you have like the ultra YouTubers like Linus Tech Tips and Marquise Brownlee who shoot in 8K to output a 4K because it's sharper. But that's not. I don't think that's what these cameras exist to do. That's just like what YouTube leads us to believe. Like the advantages of resolution go beyond just sharpness and detail. Like there's stuff that's beyond what we currently know as people who don't work in VFX.
True. To be fair, I've just Googled it, and one of the points they've said is better for post production. So yeah, you're bang on the money with that. But it's saying stuff like there's finer details. And again, I feel like that's just they're going back to the whole thing of they're able to reframe in post.
It could also be a kind of thing where they're capturing assets for VFX. Let's say there's like for example, Hurt Locker. At the start when the thing blows up, and like you see it in super slow motion, and it's like you see every single little piece of dirt and stuff fly up from the ground. Imagine shooting that in 12K.
Yeah.
I think it might be more sort of an asset creation and capturing rather than actual like output sort of thing.
To be fair, like that's just reminded me of. Have you seen Guy Ritchie, Sherlock Holmes, Game of Shadows, the second one, where they're running through the forest and it's just zooming in and out constantly between like 3 frame sizes. I feel like shooting that in 12K, if you could get 12K slow-mo, like phantom cameras shooting in 12K, that I could see a benefit of. And I won't disagree with you in terms of there is quite a few benefits to post-production. It's like on set though, like from experiences on set, I don't see there being many, if like any, benefits. But again, like you say, it's depends what you're doing, and we don't have the necessary experience to turn around and say we know what we're on about, kind of thing. It's like we've both had experiences, but we're not, big names in the industry.
You have to think of it as everything, all the equipment you have at your disposal as a filmmaker or a cameraman or whatever you want to call yourself. They're all just tools in the toolbox, and you use the right tool for the right job. If I'm making a vlog, I'm shooting 1080p on a DSLR, whatever, GoPro, whatever. But if I'm, like Sherlock Holmes reference, if I'm shooting something like that and I want to be able to go from, extreme wide to extreme close in the exact same shot without cutting or without just like physically zooming, if I want to be able to keep that detail at wide and just punch in wherever I want to. Say if I'm filming a war scene and there's lots of things happening in a wide shot, I want to be able to go boom, 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 like that. Then you need a very specific tool to be able to do that. I think that's what the 12K camera is. It's another tool to accomplish a very specific task if you need to do that. But for them, it's not like it's going to be, this 12K camera comes out and like it just trickles down to everywhere. I think it's a case of it's like 8K cameras now. Like
it's a very specialized
to do a
niche.
job, like that you need it to do, not that everyone needs it to do. It's like an F1 car. F1 cars, Like, fastest cars in the world, F1 cars. But you're not going to take it to work every day. It,
Is that not how you get to work every day? No.
I don't know.
To be fair, if I'm remembering correctly, the scene we're on about in Sherlock Holmes, they filmed it with like 3 cameras.
Did they?
I think 3 high-speed cameras in like 4K. And the way they do it is you had, I think it was like a 24 lens, a 35, and then like a 70. So you had different frame sizes. And essentially they have all 3 pointing at the same thing, essentially
Yeah.
on top of each other. They all record, and then they digitally zoom in like the 24. They digitally zoom until they hit the 35, at which point they then cut to the 35 and zoom. And at the speed
the
it's
mask it with
happened,
the
you
motion
don't
blur.
notice
Yeah.
the resolution drop. So it was very well done. But yeah, like you say, with a 12K camera, you could probably do that with one, like maybe 2, depending on what you wanted. But one camera would be able to do that, depending on
It's
what
not
you're doing.
it's not like a 12K is going to revolutionize video. It's just another tool in the toolbox. That's all it is.
Could you imagine like vloggers walking around with a 12K camera, like a battery pack
The thing is, mate,
on?
the state of YouTube, I wouldn't
Jesus.
think it's too far away. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if I think
No,
Linus Tech Tips have already done a video on the 12K camera. I wouldn't be surprised if one day.
I'm pretty sure
Wouldn't be
they've got
surprised if one
one.
day they're
Yeah.
like, oh, this vlog is in 12K.
Shout out to you at home watching it on
Yeah.
your 1080p screens. Jesus, because I've got what's my monitor? I think mine's it's not 4K.
1440.
Is it? I think it's a 4K. No, it's 2180. Is that the resolution? I don't know what it is. The one, it's above 1080, but it's below 4K. And it's like this alone. I'm like, it's great, but I have no benefit to get there's no benefit in me getting a 4K because most of the stuff I watch is either on my phone or on a TV, and that does everything
Yeah.
I need it to. Like I can appreciate the detail of 4K, but it's like until I actually have my own place and I've got a 4K TV, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
benefit from it.
Like I got a 4K
Yeah.
monitor now, just not because I needed a 4K monitor, it's just because I needed a new monitor, and I thought I'm not going to spend this money on a monitor and not get a 4K because I'm going to have to buy another one in a few months. So I thought I'd just buy 4K now, and then I've got it. So, and 4K is sort of the working standard now, I imagine, sort of in the vast majority of cases. So it's good to have 4K screens if you need them, but 12K, long way off. We'll be in the, like.
Oh, could you imagine how much a 12K screen would cost? Jesus. I don't know. That would cost more than the camera itself, I think. I want to try and find the mag sizes. How?
Well, I can sort of guesstimate because a camera, like my camera, my Canon 80D, that when that shoots a still image, a raw still image, that is 35 megabytes. And that's just below 8K. So imagine if, say, 12K, it's probably going to end up being like, I don't know, something stupid like 50 or 60 megabytes per frame, depending on what resolution, depending on what frame rate you're shooting at. That could be massive file sizes.
Yeah. So just really quickly, 1 hour of 8K raw is 7.29 terabytes. 1 minute of raw 8K footage is 121.5 gigabytes, and that's 8K. So I don't even want to know what 12K is.
Probably double that.
Yeah, that's like you're going to be switching mags every 20 seconds with that, because I know what the cameras I'm working with are shooting on. They're shooting 6.5K, and I think it's a 1 or 2 terabyte mag that can hold 40 minutes. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like my SSD in my camera is 128 gigabytes, and I don't think I ever need to switch out SSDs. Like that holds everything I need it to until I need to format it. Like
it's just the
and I only got that because
it's just the
cheap.
scale of things. When you get to the higher end, it just gets bigger and more expensive, and more difficult to handle. That's why the top budget things are able to do the things they're able to do, because they're able to capture so much information.
Because they've got money.
And money.
It's mad. It's one of those things where I just sort of look in envy of, like, I wish I could work in that position, to the point it's like, screw it, we'll just shoot things in over 6K because we can. Like, we've got access to these like 8K cameras. Screw it, let's just get 3 of them and film all in 8K.
See, I'm sort of the opposite. Like, I'm dreading the day where I can shoot with like all those cameras, because I know that for the vast majority of things that I like to do, I probably don't need it. But it's one of those it's one of those things. It's like I think Netflix, they've got like a pre-approved list of like cameras.
You have to have it has to be a pre-approved camera.
So it become one of those things. Like that's where it sort of gets tricky, because you have to sort of you choose, like, it's sort of mad to think about that. Like you talk like, oh, the camera doesn't matter. Like, it's just about the story and stuff. And Netflix are like, no, the camera does matter.
The story has to matter, but also you have to have spent X amount on your camera. Like, yeah. No, it's really weird, because like you say, we were taught in uni and throughout just like film school in general, you're taught that it's all about the story and about how you portray your characters and whatever it is they're trying to do. But then you get into the industry and it's like, if you want it to look good,
like
you need
a certain standard that like certain companies are willing to put their name on.
At least 6K, yeah.
So,
because it's like, could you imagine Disney shooting stuff on like an iPhone camera? It just, because they shoot in 4K. Like, my phone shoots in 4K, but you wouldn't see, like, I don't know, whoever the head of, was it Bob Iger or whoever it is, head of Disney, you wouldn't see him go, all right, cool, well, we've got the new Aladdin remake, it's shot on iPhone, but it's in 4K, so
Same thing, isn't it?
It's fine, it works. They've got 3 lenses on there, it's fine. Yeah. But to be fair, it's sort of very much shoehorning it in, but do you think with the way technology is going, do you think filmmakers will become lazy as their jobs become easier? And the one thing I've got in mind for this is pre-visualization. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but for those of you watching who don't know what that is, essentially for projects like the Marvel films, everything is overseen by someone like Kevin Feige, who he's the one who essentially makes all the shots. He goes to a previs artist who goes, right, like, gives them the story and is like, right, this is what we want. These are the beats we need. The previs artist then animates everything. It's handed off to the director, who then goes, right, this is what the shot needs to look like. This is what needs to happen in the shot. Go. And all the director has to do essentially is just sit there and make sure the shot looks good. So does previs take the creativity away from the director, to the point the director is just going to become lazy? They just need to sit there and make sure the shot works.
Is this your question of the week?
It can be.
If it's not, then don't make it. But
there you go. I don't have a question of the week, so
I think
it can be.
It very much depends on what kind of production you're talking about. So, to use the Marvel example, like, by the time they come to actually, they're on set and they're shooting the Marvel films, the vast majority of that is all pre-done. Like, they know what's going to happen, like the big set pieces and stuff. Like, that's all pre, like you said, like they're getting previous, so they know what they're out there to get. So the film's already sort of made at that point. They're just actually capturing it. Like, everything's, what all the decisions have been made. So by the time you actually get to set, you're just capturing the stuff to actually make it and plug it in, so it's not just like sketches and animations. And then obviously, like the more sort of character driven moments, they're still directed in like a more traditional style. But anything that's like big VFX or VFX intensive, that's, all the creative decisions on that are pretty much made before they even get to set. So by the time you get there, you're just following the instructions essentially. And I think in that case, like, yeah, I think that can breed complacency. But I think once you're dealing with something like Marvel, for example, the director, obviously they have their say in certain things, but like, Marvel, Star Wars, other things, other pre-established franchises that are long running, you sort of, the studio is already making those decisions. Like, J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, I'm very confident in saying that they didn't have total creative control over the Star Wars films. I'm very confident in saying that like a lot of those decisions that were made in Star Wars films, well, again they reshot a lot of stuff, but a lot of that came from higher up. So they're sort of pushing their sort of vision as a producer or as a studio or whatever. So you could argue that in the cases where previs is so intensively done and so such a big thing, it doesn't really matter if it breeds complacency because the director has less input in those sequences anyway. But I think if you're looking about sort of not independent films, but like films that exist on their own, so like not part of a pre-established franchise, I think a good example of a film that tanked is, you might have even heard of it, Valerian, City of Planets, I think it's called.
Oh yeah,
Cara
yeah,
Delevingne
yeah.
and the other
Cara
guy.
Delevingne and the guy who played Harry Osborn in Amazing Spider-Man
Like,
films.
that film tanked, and that film was just a CG
Yeah.
mob fest. Like, that film tanked. I think that was a good example of technology making the creative minds complacent in that case, because they're just like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's CG, CG, CG. The audience goers are stupid. They'll just be too amazed by CG. We don't have to worry about this stuff.
It's the definition of
Yeah,
fix it in post,
like
pretty
I think if
much.
you're a filmmaker
Yeah.
with a fix it in post attitude, then yeah, technology is going to tank your career so fast because like there's no big budget film that goes into it with a fix it in post attitude. I think like here's a theory of mine. It's like indie filmmakers, student filmmakers, people just starting out, they always seem to go with the fix it in post attitude because it's easier than getting it right first time. And then you've got like the middle tier who are like reasonably successful, but not like, into like the studio system or anything like that. They're just successful in their own right, doing what they do. And they sort of, get it right on set. And then you have the higher up, like the Marvel, the Star Wars, that kind of thing, where it's, you don't fix the film in post, you make it in post. Like,
Yeah.
the previs is where you sort of make you set the target, and then you have shooting it, which is just collecting the assets, and then you have the post, which is actually making the film as you see it on screen. So if you're one of those people who is still stuck in the whole fix it and post attitude, once you get access to that technology, if you even make it that far, because I don't think you will if you got the fix it and post attitude, but once you get access to that, then you just basically, you might as well just be waving around your 8K camera in the field somewhere. Just, you might as well just throw it around and just see what it captures and be like, oh, fix it in post, because I think that'll be just as just as useful as someone trying to shoot their short film in 8K and thinking, oh, we've got 8K, so I can do whatever I want in post. I can just CG in an actor who didn't show up.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think, yeah, the whole point you've just made of like the MCU films are pretty much successful because they are allowed to be so fantastical because of CG. But then, pretty sure we mentioned this last episode or episode before or whatever, but about Christopher Nolan, the fact he is determined to get anything he can done
Yeah,
in camera. He doesn't rely too heavily on CG like Interstellar. You've got that weird robot thing,
Yeah.
where they're on the water planet. The robot was done practically, and then they cleaned it up with CG. But it's like that would be one thing most directors turn around and go, "How the hell are we? No, screw that. Just do it
Yeah.
in
It's
post.
easier.
Just have Andy Serkis stand there with a tennis ball in his head." But no, like Christopher Nolan, I respect because he is determined to get anything he can on film. Like Tenet, pretty sure we did a lot of shitting
Yeah,
on
we
Tenet
did.
before, but he gets a lot of stuff in camera, and I'm pretty sure to the point like I've only seen the film once because it still hurts my brain to think about it. But there's a shot where characters are running in real time. Like they're running one way, but then time is reversing around them. Again, that's essentially the premise of the film for those who haven't seen it. Um, but you can see that the characters who are meant to be running one way are actually just running backwards, and the shot has been reversed because there's a big explosion as they run past. And I think, I mean, you can clearly see when someone's meant, like, when something looks off, you can see it because we're so used to seeing people running, we're so used
Yeah.
to seeing faces. So that's when, like, Uncanny Valley comes in because it looks real, like, it looks right, but something's off. Um, so I do feel like in that aspect, because he's so determined to get things in camera, he shot himself in the foot a bit because he's limited himself to what can we do in camera and avoided, the whole thing of the fact there are people paid millions and millions to create things out of nothing and to make your film look better. Like you don't necessarily need to have those two, like you don't need that shot all done in one take. You could have the I don't know, the big explosion and all that, record
Yeah.
that and then record people running properly and then just composite them on top of each other. You don't need to do it all in one and just reverse it.
Yeah. There's pros and cons to
Yeah.
every method of shooting there is. There's a
But then it is quite easy for us to sit here and shit on it when in reality he's probably contemplated all that and gone, no, I feel like this would
Yeah,
be
I mean,
more
I
effective.
think anytime you commit yourself to doing one thing or another, it's always a gamble because if you commit yourself to CG, there's
Yeah.
always a chance that it doesn't, the product isn't as polished as you'd like it to be because you haven't got time or the money to make it perfect. Um,
Well, an example of that is the final fight in Black
mm,
Panther. I think someone in a video I watched put it in a perfect way, which is you've got this incredible CG environment, everything looks incredible, and then the final fight looks like a mobile game advert.
yeah,
It looks really odd because there was issues with the VFX. Like they were given like a month to do this major thing, and it's yeah because they didn't anticipate things going wrong and they were so reliant on CG, they shot
yeah.
themselves
So
in the
like
foot. But
you have the if you commit to doing something in CG, you're running the risk of not being able to get it right, and once you've used your money and used your time, then you're sort of stuck with whatever CG is at the time. What's that film with like The Rock? There's the film with that really terrible CG when The Rock is like a lobster or something. I can't remember what it's called. Uh, that's
the
it. Yeah,
Mummy, and he's the
yeah,
Scorpion
that's
King
it.
or something.
Like you could end up with that or like Jar Jar Binks or something stupid. But then if you go the other way and commit to doing it all in camera and doing it all naturally and real, you're then limited by if it's a fight scene, for example, you're limited by how good your actors can fight. So which is like films like The Matrix, for example. They A lot of their fighting stuff, obviously, it's all a bit sort of fantastical anyway. But they trained and loads of films they train for months and months just to get fight scenes right. Like in the Star Wars prequels, there's footage of Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen just practicing their lightsaber duels, and like Ray Park as well in Phantom Menace. There's footage of them. They're practicing for months and months and months for a fight that takes place sort of like 5 minutes of screen time in the actual film.
Yeah.
So again, you're limited. So if you do it all naturally, you're limited to what your actors can do. If you do it in CG, you're limited to what you can afford and what you have time to wait for. So there's pros and cons to everything. But I think there's
I yeah.
sorry, I'm just saying there's a
Sorry, go.
certain quality that you get from doing things naturally, and there's a certain like there's a quality you get from doing things naturally that you just can't get with CG for the most part. But then if you do things with CG, then the sky is well, not even the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want with CG, but then it sort of depends on the subject matter. So if I was filming like a a guy robbing a shop, and I decided I was like, oh well, I could do all this in camera, but I really like it to be CG. Like what am I going to CG from a guy robbing a corner shop? Like
Yeah.
so. There's certain times where it works, and certain times where it's just not needed.
It's if you limit yourself to only CG, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna look good because you've got
It's not
nothing
real. Yeah.
real there. You're not obeying the laws of physics. Like things aren't going to work unless you are some absolute mathematical genius who can work out the issues of why CG doesn't quite work. It's not going to work. But then it's exactly the same on the other spectrum. If you limit yourself to only what is real, you can't then make a fantasy
Yeah.
film because if you're trying to make it real, like you're trying to get it in cam, unless you have the budget of Christopher Nolan, who even again with Tenet doesn't look great at times, you again limit yourself. So you need to find that place of you record as much as you can in camera, and then for the shots where you need something so fantastical that it's not real,
Yeah.
that's when you bring in
It's
CG.
about managing the
Because
what's the term? Suspended disbelief. So the
yeah,
audience to a certain point will suspend. They will just accept something if it makes sense. Like the Marvel films, for example. Again, we keep coming back to Marvel. It's like
yeah,
if you was to if you're going to try and make the MCU without CG, don't bother. Don't bother. But
it
like
wouldn't work.
you can
Yeah,
rely so heavily on CG in something like the Marvel films because it's in line with what is that universe. Like you can't like I'm not going to sit there and be like disappointed by Iron Man because people can't
mm.
actually fly around in suits like that. Of course they can't. I know they can't. But I'm suspending that. I'm in suspended disbelief because I'm allowing myself to just be in this alternative reality that exists and things can happen like that. And that's
Yeah.
fine. It's when you start putting CG in places where it doesn't need to be. Like I said earlier, it's just one of those things.
What's the what's the film? I can't remember what it is. They've got a close up and it's quite an emotional scene or something. I want to say it's like Keira Knightley or someone like that. And they needed them to cry,
Oh
but they
yeah,
couldn't. For some reason, they couldn't cry. So they added a CG tear. And it's the thing of it looks good unless you actually stop to think about it because I haven't seen the scene
yeah.
in a
I
long, long time, but essentially the tear doesn't follow the path of tear. It just sort of
yeah.
goes diagonally. It's like it doesn't follow the nose and then drip off on the mouth. It's like it looks really odd. But then yeah, again going back to the MCU in Endgame when you've got every single character you've ever had comes through all those portals and they have the huge fight sequence. I remember watching it for the first time and I actually had to pinch myself and go, 99% of this isn't real. You've got the odd CG, like you've got the odd composite of people in like mocap suits. It's like Spider-Man, Iron Man, who are there in literally just pajamas with ping pong balls all over them. It's a bit more fancy than that now, but that's how I like to picture it. But they're there, and then next to them you've got the Hulk beating up like a Leviathan who's the size of like
Hmm.
five double-decker buses. And it's the thing of because it's so amazing, it's so well done, I do forget. And as someone who's so heavily critical of films because I like to sit and think about how they're done, and the fact I know how things are done behind the scenes, being able to then just actually switch off and enjoy it like any other person is a really nice sensation. So then to see something which would be so much cheaper to do in camera, but they've done it in CG, is just ridiculous. Like John Wick, the infamous dog poo.
No.
I don't know if you've seen this. So I can't remember which one. I want to say it's the first John Wick, where it's like the wife has left him a puppy or something. So it's you're introduced to this dog, and then the dog goes outside, goes for a poo, and then the dog runs away, and there's a poo on the ground, as there normally is. But it's CG poo. It's not real. It's not really there. And it's just looking at it like, how much did that cost? How much did that cost you to get that one shot? It's on screen for about 5 seconds, when you can get a fairly realistic looking fake poo off Amazon for less than a tenner. Like, there needs to be that ground of, why have you done that? You've done that just because you know you can. It's like the studio's gone, you've got whatever budget you need. So you don't need to CG something where it's going to be in shot for 5 seconds. It's so small in the frame. It's covered by grass and stuff. It's like, just get a fake poo. It's made of plastic. You can pick it up and move it.
Well, if you've got a dog on set, just wait for it to...
Well, that's the thing. Because they were saying legally they can't give the dog laxatives, so they couldn't have
just wait for it to go naturally.
Oh. Just wait for it to go naturally.
You know,
right, sit right here and you can't move.
I grew up with 4 dogs. It doesn't take long for a dog to need to go.
But yeah, it's something like that where it's getting it in camera would have been so much easier and so much cheaper.
Like as technology becomes more abundant and more available and more easy to attain and access, same thing. It does. For certain people, it will be too tempting to just not bother getting it right the first time, or not bother doing things a certain way, just because we can just do it, we can just add it in, or like, if this actor messed up their lines, we'll just like, record them on a green screen and put them in over the top or whatever, like that kind of thing. I imagine.
What was it? ARD or something, like audio replacement. ADR, that's it. But I think this goes quite nicely back to the point we're making, like, filmmakers are becoming lazy because they know they can rely on CG. And the fact CG is so good now to what it was 5-10 years ago. The fact that they can just rely on someone to just be combusted into a scene almost seamlessly. Like, a lot of the time in films, you won't even think about the fact that, like, they were filming this scene in Canada, but then the actor was based in London at the time, but seamlessly they're interacting, and you don't think about it because it looks so good. So CG has come so far, but then I do believe it has made people lazy is the wrong term. It's made them, that's a good, it's made them too reliant on it, to the point where if they're making a big budget film, admittedly, you can't just rely on things working 100% of the time, which is fine. Like, that's why you have things like CG, so you can clean things up after the fact. But going back to the whole dog poo thing in John Wick, it's like, how much money did you spend on that one shot, when I think you can get in a practical joke shop, you could get your set, like your prop master, to make it look a bit more real and just put it down. It's like, there was no need for it. It doesn't add to the film in any way.
It's just because you can.
Like,
Again, it just comes back to what I said earlier about the 12K camera. Is everything you have access to as a filmmaker, they're all just tools in the toolbox, and it's about knowing what tool to use and when to use it and when not to do it. You shouldn't hammer in. You could hammer a nail in with the side of a spanner. You could, but it's not the right tool for the job. And at the same time, it's like you could. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm not going to go into DIY analogies.
You could open a car door with a crowbar, but you shouldn't.
So,
It does the trick, just
Yeah,
not
so
the way you're meant to do
it's
it.
becoming like
Yeah.
historically, I feel like filmmaking was all about, obviously it's like the story and stuff because technology wasn't so abundant. But now, like with our generation, I feel like we're just getting into the industry, and there is so much available to us now. Like the skill of a filmmaker isn't just about getting everyone together on time, getting the right locations and stuff, and getting the script right, getting the story right, getting the actors right, getting the casting right, that kind of stuff. It's no longer just about that process. It's also about understanding the technology and knowing when to and when not to use certain things. Like I remember, like when me and Matt, who was on last week, who wasn't here this week, continuity. Um, when me and Matt were working on, he was doing a mockumentary at uni, and I do remember him saying, I think he had a friend in third year or maybe a friend in a master's year or something who had access to the red camera at uni,
Oh yeah, the
and I
infamous
remember
red.
him floating the idea of they wanted to do like a sort of a jokey cinematic sequence for these two characters. I wasn't sure what it was. I can't remember now. It's too long ago. But they were like, we
Yeah.
were, we were recording on DSLRs for the main show, and he was like, oh yeah, for the cinematic bits we can get the red camera. And I was just like, I remember when he floated that idea to me, I was like, no, we don't need that. That poses more problems than it solves. The benefits are massively outweighed by the problems or by the difficulty
Yeah.
of doing it. Just because you shoot something on a red doesn't mean it's going to look cinematic. You could film a documentary on a red.
Yeah, it's the fact you're suddenly going from working with SD cards to working with
Yeah,
red mags, which then means you've got to have a red mag reader, which then means you've got to have like a system which
yeah. The
supports that,
workflow is
and
all
you've got to
connected.
then
You
be
can't
able to.
you can't just change one thing
You
for the
can't.
most part. You can't
Yeah.
just change one thing without expecting a bunch of other things to change down the line. If I decided I wanted to shoot something in 4Ks rather than 1080p, you know, have I got enough SD cards to hold that footage? Can I, uh, whoever's editing that film, can they edit 4K at whatever length it is? If I wanted to add in something, if I was to shoot something entirely in 4K or 8K, whatever, just because in case I wanted to reframe something, um, then that affects the entirety of your workflow because what's coming in at one end is so much more dense to work with than what it needs to be. So instead of like thinking, oh, I'll shoot it all in like 8K or 6K so I can reframe it just in case, you just got to think maybe I should spend the extra few minutes just thinking about the frame before I hit record rather than just being like, oh, that'll do, that'll do, that'll do, that'll do. And then you'll find your editor
Mm.
sat in a pool of sweat, his hair falling out, like trying to figure out how to get all this stuff to work together. But
Yeah.
I do feel like we should move on to our question of the week and get wrapped up because we are currently sitting at 1 hour and 40 minutes. Nice.
Nice.
Feature length episode.
Nice. Okay. What do you think? I'm literally just getting one off the top of my head now. What do you think is one element of filmmaking? So whether that's the volume, that's 12K cameras or whatever. What do you think is one thing where it looks promising, but you don't think it's gonna like actually benefit people in the way it's sort of expected to?
Looks promising but won't benefit people.
It's like there's a lot of hype about it, kind of thing. So like with the volume, it's when I first heard the idea of it, I was like, how the hell is that going to just shoot it on a green screen? And then when I've seen it in action, I'm like, okay, no, that's really cool. But then there's other stuff where it's like you hear about it. So say, I don't know. I've really backed myself into a corner of this because I don't even have an answer for it. This is what happens when I don't have a planned question. Um,
Would you like me to cut
yeah, just
and
something.
re-edit in a different question of the week? That's
Yeah, go
so.
on then.
So George, what's your question of the week this week? Don't worry, I can still cut this as well. Just tell me when you've thought of one, and then I'll ask you again.
Okay.
I'm going to make a note of when this is happening, so I don't have to watch it through to find it.
20 minutes of me just scrounging for something.
Got a McDonald's receipt, that'll do.
Okay.
You
All
are?
right, I think
You
I've
sure?
got one.
Okay.
I think I've got one.
Right. So before we wrap up, because we've been going for quite a while, we'll cap off this week's episode with George's question of the week, which is:
Do you think there will ever be a successful video game adaptation in film or TV?
Wait, are we talking video game to film or film to video game?
As in, yes. So, Assassin's Creed, they had a film made about it, which was awful. Or it's like Mortal Kombat. How many times have they attempted that and they all just flop?
um, so just to be clear, I can't use Hitman as an answer here because that was a game before it was a film.
Yeah. Well, no. So a game which it was a game first, and then it was made into a film or a TV show.
Hitman was a game before it was a film.
Yeah. So would you say that the Hitman film was successful?
Relatively so, yeah. Okay, right. Well, it's a bit of an open-ended question because you can't really sort of answer it until it's happened. Like, do I think there could be?
Okay, right. Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
Let me rephrase it. Do you think any adaptations thus far have been successful enough to sort of warrant more attempts at it?
Outside of Hitman, I don't think any game to film adaptation's been successful enough to.
Because I guess with Hitman though, that's essentially just like any spy film.
I think I was going to say something about that. Is like the Hitman recipe is sort of it's easily translatable to a film because it's sort of but it's not. I don't say universal because not everyone can relate to a hitman killing people, but it's one of those things where like it's easy entertainment. It's not too dissimilar from other things that we're used to seeing on film anyway. So it's not too big of a jump. But outside of Hitman, I don't think anything has really done good. to put it simply, like the Assassin's Creed thing that you brought up earlier on. I watched that in the cinema. I was dead excited because I used to play the Assassin's Creed games, and I got a bit bored of the actual gameplay of it because it's just how many Templars must I slay to get to the next cutscene. I got a bit bored of it because it's not really my thing after a certain point, of course. But I used to love the Assassin's Creed games for the overarching story and stuff that was happening. Basically in the cutscenes. So I remember when I think the last Assassin's Creed that I played all the way through was number 3 with Connor when it's I just got bored of them. I got bored of the games, so I just started watching. I think it was the end of number 3 where they like blew up the world or something stupid. Like the end of number 3 like irritated me so much. I was just like, well, I'm not going to play the whole games. I'm just going to watch the cutscenes. So since then, I just watch the cutscenes because that's the part that I'm interested in.
Yeah, no, I've done that. But one thing I found is I've watched cutscenes and then I've gone back and played the game later, and I found there's actually a lot you miss when doing that. Like there's a lot of story which is just done while playing the game.
That's true, but it's like it's again it's one of those things where I was like, when the Assassin's Creed film came out, I was so excited because I used to just love the cinematic parts of the Assassin's Creed games. And then the film came out, and I was just like, "Oh, this is not good."
See, the thing is, I feel like with the Assassin's Creed film, they tried way too hard to make it cinematic. Like the whole fact of the Animus is a table. You lie on a table, a visor goes over your head, and that's it. But then in the film, It was like, yeah, so the Animus is essentially this massive open room where a thing clips onto your back and then you're moved around the room. It's like you made that far more complicated than it needed to be. And that's one of many reasons why that film was not
Yeah, like
successful.
the Assassin's Creed formula that they use in the games, I still believe, despite the fact the film failed, that that is something that could translate really, really well to a cinema screen. I still believe that. But the Assassin's Creed film,
Mm.
yeah, like you said, it tried too hard to sort of wow you with the thing. Like it tried to reinvent the Assassin's Creed wheel. Whereas, like, just
Yeah.
the, for me, again, I'm a pretentious film, or was a pretentious film student, so maybe I have to see things differently. But for me, it's much more dramatic just seeing, someone lay down on a table and seeing the thing go over and watch them go into this different world. Like being just laying flat down on a table, that puts that character's physical body in such a more vulnerable position. He just laid there, and obviously all this stuff's happening on the inside of the animals. Like that would have been a more a more satisfying way of portraying that to me.
Mm.
But again, it's just something that I could talk about for ages because there's been so many games. Whenever I really love a game, I always think, oh, I wish there was a film of this. Like I remember I played the God, you probably wouldn't have heard of it. It was Warhammer. You've heard of Warhammer? They had a
Warhammer, yeah.
game, a first-person shooter game called Warhammer 40k uh, Fire Warrior. That's what it was called. And you played as a race of the Tau, which is a race in the Warhammer universe. And basically, this Tau, he was at war with the Space Marines, but then he gets sent over to their ship, like trying to board it, I think. But then the ship gets taken over by Chaos, which is kind of similar to the Flood in Halo, but not really. But then Chaos sort of corrupts everything, and then the Tau ends up working with the Space Marines to take down Chaos, or the Chaos.
Mm.
I remember playing that game and thinking, oh, that would be such an awesome story because you got all the elements there. You got the characters at war with each other, then they got like a greater foe, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of dynamic going on, and they have all these things to go to all these places. That'd be a really cool film, but never happened. There's a lot of games that I think would make good films, but the issue is they already exist as games, and their core audience is gamers. So when the Assassin's Creed when they made that into a film, I think they tried too hard to reach out to other audiences by sort of changing things too much. So they ended up not really capturing the audiences they wanted to, but then the audience that they already had, which was the gamers who were excited to see the film, they were then alienated from their own sort of understanding of what Assassin's Creed was to them, so they just pissed off everyone, basically. Ran over.
Yeah, it's the fact of they. It's almost like they tried to make it as if it was because it was very clearly based off the franchise, but they didn't take the key elements. They took the
Yeah.
bits they wanted, which was the fact that it's someone who is put into a machine and then they travel back in time to relive their ancestors' memories. But they essentially slapped Assassin's
Yeah.
Creed on there, but then didn't take any of the elements that made Assassin's Creed what it is, which is the story beats, the fact that you've got Templars versus the Assassins and all that, and they had that, but they had their version of it. It wasn't what we went in expecting
Yeah,
as people
it
who
felt
enjoy the
very much to
franchise.
me like it's something I felt when I first watched it back whenever it came out ages ago. Um, it felt like the Assassin's Creed name and the branding of Assassin's Creed and the names and stuff. It felt like they'd used that as like a marketing tool rather than as like
Mm.
proper source material. That's how I remember feeling about it when I first watched it. It's like they've
Yeah,
got this idea that's similar to Assassin's Creed, so they were just like, well, why don't we just call it Assassin's Creed? You know,
yeah. Well, I don't know if you've played any of the Resident Evil
I
games.
played. Biohazard. Is that 7? The new one.
The new one is Village, which is 8. So yeah,
Yeah.
Biohazard would have been 7. Yeah. But they are apparently, I think it's a HBO thing. They're doing a
Okay.
TV show based within the universe. I think it's actually just they've essentially adapted one of the games into a TV show. And I feel like because Resident Evil, like Assassin's Creed, has such a cult following, it's such a popular franchise. They either need to establish that it's a totally different adaptation of the game, like it's taken the characters, but it's a whole new story, or they essentially need to do beat for beat what
Hmm.
happens within the game world, because otherwise you're essentially saying, yeah, it's Resident Evil 3, you've got these characters and XYZ, this is what's happened,
Didn't they
but
already make? They made Resident
it's
Evil
totally
films, didn't
different
they?
to what you've already done.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
they
I can't
did.
remember how they did because that was before I was like Resident Evil 7 is the only one that I've played. I've not really been that infatuated with Resident Evil.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, they've got six
But I
six
feel like
Resident
Resident
Evil
Evil is the
films
kind of recipe that
with
can be translated across to film or TV relatively well because you have like, is it Umbrella Corp? It's like the over thing,
yeah,
and they got
Umbrella
all
Corp.
these like different goings on and different happenings that you can sort of
Mm,
shoehorn things in without being too on the nose with it.
yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, like it's. I mean, realistically, when you just boil it down to its core elements, Resident Evil is a zombie outbreak, and you've got this evil corporation.
Corporation.
What's the word? Corporation. Thank you. Corporation is behind it all, and they're doing it so they can essentially control things, and then it's got out of hand. But like that's when you boil it down to its core elements. But if you're going to take the title of Resident Evil, you need to follow essentially
Yeah,
the law which has been set out by the games. You can't, yeah. One of the main reasons why Assassin's Creed failed is they took the name, they took the law, but they didn't
yeah.
follow what was already set out. They tried to make their own thing, which is why people didn't like it because it didn't fit what they expected. I mean, if you took away the Assassin's Creed title, it was a decent film, but it
Yeah.
wasn't an Assassin's
So one
Creed
thing is
film.
when you try
Yeah,
to
that was the
adapt
issue.
something, you've always got the weight of the original name. Like the Tolkien estate. Believe I'm right in saying this, but I believe the Tolkien estate at the time, probably still now, they didn't like the Lord of the Rings films when they were first released because they felt
Mm.
like they turned them into there were too much action. They turned what was very sort of like in the books, Tolkien doesn't really write that much about the battles that took place in Middle Earth. I think it's like all this stuff, all this lore and stuff, and then it's like when it comes to battles, it's like there was a battle. Next thing, like Battle at Helm's Deep was like a few pages
Yeah,
long in the book, whereas obviously in the film it's the majority of the film.
but then how long is
So the
it in
Tolkien
the
estate
film?
didn't
Yeah.
like that because they thought that it sort of turned. They thought Peter Jackson had turned Tolkien's books into like just action films, which I can kind of understand
Mm.
their viewpoint on that, with them being so attached to the source material. But whenever you turn anything, whether it's a book into a film or a game into a film or a film into a TV series, whatever, you always have the weight of the original name and the original source material that you have to consider,
Yeah.
which it can be a good thing because obviously like I can probably guarantee that like more than half the people who went to see the Assassin's Creed film went to see it because they played or heard of the Assassin's Creed games.
And not because Michael
Yeah,
Fassbender was in a new film. But then that actually ties quite nicely back to our very first point, which is One Division is so successful because you can literally hold it up next to other MCU entries and it
yeah,
stands its own ground. Like it stands there of like, I am a separate thing. Like I exist within the universe, but it holds its own ground. It's still so
yeah.
well made and the story is so meticulous, and it fits everything we know.
It becomes
That's
Yeah, it
why it's
becomes one
so
of those things that can
successful.
exist on its own if need be, but if you have seen the other films, the MCU films, it's then like extra satisfying because you understand. You'll get answers to all your questions in within the series. I imagine. I've not seen it all yet, but I imagine you get the answers
Yeah.
inside that. But if you've seen the Avengers films, if you've seen the other MCU films, you can see, a character, or you can see them talk about an event, and you can understand it, and you're like, oh, look at me with my insider knowledge. It's satisfying for that. But if you haven't, then you can watch it on its own because
Yeah.
it's so well crafted.
Well, it's the so when you're in the TV universe, like we say in episode 4, I believe, takes place outside of the universe. Like as in you're within the TV world of Westview, and then episode 4 takes place outside of that. But all the episodes within Westview, you've got an
Yeah,
advert in the middle, and it's like every advert is a callback to something that has happened within Wanda's life.
okay,
So obviously you don't know what the most recent one is, but the Stark
yeah,
toaster is reference to the fact that
yeah,
her parents were killed because of Tony Stark, like Stark technology. He then got
yeah.
Hydra.
The watch.
Um, I can't remember his name. Yeah, so you got the watch, and then you've got another Hydra thing. And then you don't have anything episode 4, but episode 5, there's another big one. And it's one of those things, it would just go over your head if
Yeah,
you didn't know. And yeah, it's just like, okay, all these are quirky little things, cool, whatever. But knowing, like looking at it and going, I know exactly why that's there, I know what that's referring to, that's really,
yeah.
yeah, because again, it ties
It's
in so
it's it's a
well.
similar thing to like again Lord of the Rings. It's like I can watch the films. The films obviously standalone as they are because we know this now. They've been out for 20 years. God, I'm old. But like having read or well listened to the books in my case, dyslexic. But having knowing all the stuff that's talked about in the books, when a character references something, if they're talking about something and just like say like a little name pops in, where it's not that significant in the film, but for me as someone who's um, you know read the books or listened to the books, I then know that that's a reference to this thing, which has all these other things, and it's like the film stands alone by itself, but if you've seen the source material, then it's like extra satisfying. And I think
Hmm.
that's sort of how I think that's the recipe for making a good game to film adaptation or game to TV series adaptation is to sort of have this standalone story which is enhanced by the source material. Like if you hear a reference to something, then or hear or see a reference to something that happened in the original games or whatever, that's a better way to go than rather than just sort of taking the badge and just trying to make your own thing. You should just sort of, if you're going to make your own thing, but make it sort of fit in as and when it needs to.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've just clicked over 2 hours. So unless you've got something
Damn.
you really want to get off your mind, I feel like it might be a good time to.
Um, no, I mean, very quickly, you saying about how Lord of the Rings books, like there's things that happen in the books that don't happen in the films, or vice versa. It's like with Harry Potter.
Mm,
Like, I'm a big Harry Potter fan, having read the books. It's like there are major things which are left out of the films, which I'm still confused about. I don't understand why. But then there's elements which are also changed to fit the fact that characters introduced much earlier in the books weren't introduced in the films. So it's like big story points have to be adapted. So it's in Order of the Phoenix. For those who haven't read the book, I won't spoil it for you. But essentially, in the film, Cho Chang is the reason why the Dumbledore's army bit gets found out because she's given a truth potion by Umbridge. In the books, however, there's a whole other reason. It's a whole different character,
mm,
and it's all explained in the books very very well. But it's the thing of there are so many jokes made about it now because Cho is not the reason things unfold the way they do in the books, but in the film she's seen as sort of like you're just a bit of a bitch, to be honest. But yeah. Anyway, That's it. I'm done. We should probably wrap up now.
We might have to split this one into two parts because it's so long. Have that intermission.
Oh God. All right. Anyway,
Mise-En-Sesh, episode 4.
We'll call that there.
Deathly Hallows.
Oh God, part 15 or whatever we're gonna have. But yes,
If you made it to the
watching.
Big thank you for watching. If you're still here, then
if you made it this far, then leave a comment and say that you enjoyed the Assassin's Creed film. We'll know what you mean. People who haven't made it this far will just think you're being really weird, but we'll appreciate it. But yeah, thank you for watching. I've been George. He's been Elliot. And we will see you whenever.
Next time. Hopefully, Matt will be back. Maybe not. No promises.